The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello.
You know, Beth, before we get into this episode, I'd like everyone to know that we've been both listening to podcasts for like the last 26 years or so, and I don't think we ever realized just how much work goes into the production process to bring listeners great content. You know, especially for podcasters who aren't part of a big network and are competing with large networks with deep pockets. You know, we're new to hosting a podcast and we're only a little under 2 months old and still learning the process, to tell you the truth. But we put a lot of work in trying to bring you all the best content and audio quality that we can. You know, we hope you all continue with us as we continue to learn and grow. And honestly, we thank each and every one of you that have been listening to the show. You know, we're truly blown away. You're not just numbers to us. You're part of the Wanderers family.
Yes, we really thank all of you. And please continue to tell your friends about Where Our Minds Wander. And also make sure to like, follow, or subscribe on the app of your choice. And when you have a moment, leave a comment and 5-star review for us on that app. And we'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, we certainly would. So, what are you talking about tonight?
I'm going to take us to 1948 South Australia to Somerton Beach and an unsolved mystery.
Oh, great. I'm ready to go on a trip.
John Bain Lyons and his wife were strolling along Somerton Beach, South Australia, on the evening of November 30th, 1948. As they walked, they happened to notice a man who they thought might be intoxicated. Although smartly dressed, he laid on the sand, his head resting against a seawall. His legs were outstretched, his ankles crossed. Odd behavior to be well dressed and laying directly on the sand, but the man seemed to be half-heartedly attempting to smoke a cigarette. Half an hour later, another couple noticed the same man lying in the exact same position. They also noted how well dressed he was, in a suit and highly polished shoes. They later described him as well-built and between 40 to 50 years old, with gingery brown hair graying a bit at the temples. They guessed he was about 5 feet 11 inches tall, and the reason they could study him so well is that he seemed to be fast asleep, although they joked that he must be dead to the world not to notice the swarm of mosquitoes around his face.
Oh.
Yeah. The following morning, John Lyons was returning from a morning swim when he saw a group of people clustered around the seawall where he and his wife had noticed the intoxicated man the previous night. He joined the small crowd and looked down on the same well-dressed man. The man's cigarette was lying on his collar, half-smoked, but there were no signs of violence. The man, however, was unquestionably dead.
Oh, no. I thought he really tied one on.
No. The body arrived at the Royal Adelaide Hospital 3 hours later. Dr. John Barclay Bennett put the time of death at no earlier than 2 a.m., noting that the cause was most likely heart failure. Oh, and he suspected that the man was poisoned. The body arrived with no wallet or ID of any kind, and the contents of his pockets were rather mundane. Train tickets from Adelaide to Somerton Beach, a pack of chewing gum, matches, 2 combs, and a pack of Army Club cigarettes. The pack of cigarettes, interestingly, contained 7 cigarettes that were an entirely different brand, Cansitas.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That kind of sounds like he was bumming cigarettes from people. I mean, that would kind of explain it to me, because most people stick with their favorite brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was odd, but I think your assumption would be what most people thought. None of the man's clothes had any name tags. Strangely, all but one of the maker's labels were even cut out. One trouser pocket did have a tear at some point, but was tidily mended with an unusual variety of orange thread. Since there was no ID on the man, the police had 0 leads to his identity. They noted his fine Britisher face with grayish blue eyes and that his pupils were smaller than normal. They also noted that his spleen was, quote, strikingly large and firm, about 3 times normal size, end quote, and his liver was distended with congested blood. So, yeah, a little suspicious.
Yeah, to say the least.
Pathologist John Dwyer found the remains of his last meal in the man's stomach and more blood. Coupled with the man's strange behavior on the beach, Dwyer tested both the blood and the organs for traces of poison, but found nothing. In fact, he could find no cause of death at all. There were other peculiarities. For example, the man's calf muscles were high and very well developed, but his toes were oddly wedge-shaped. One expert who supplied evidence at the inquest noted that perhaps the man had been in the habit of wearing high-heeled and pointed shoes. It was suggested then that the John Doe, now called the Somerton Man, may have been a ballet dancer. Thomas Cleland, the Adelaide coroner, didn't know what to think. He consulted Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks, an eminent professor, and the 2 men came to the assumption that the Somerton Man had to have been given a rare poison, but one that decomposed very early after death, leaving no trace. According to Hicks, the only poisons capable of this were digitalis and strophanthin. Strophanthin? Am I saying that right?
Strophanthin.
You say it with such ease, and yet my tongue doesn't go around it.
Well, I was in the medical community.
Hicks leaned towards strophanthin, a rare glycoside used by a Somali tribe to poison their arrows. With very little to go on, the Adelaide police took a full set of fingerprints that they circulated through Australia and then on to other parts of the world. They came up empty. No one had any clue who the Somerton Man was. They entertained every lead and came up short. Their new game plan was to locate any abandoned personal possessions like luggage. They checked every hotel, dry cleaner, lost property office, and railway station for miles around. And that at least paid off. On January 12th, detectives were given a brown suitcase that had been deposited in the main Adelaide railway station cloakroom on November 30th. The staff, of course, couldn't remember anything about the owner.
Mm-hmm.
The case, strangely, had no traces of any kind of ID. It had no stickers or labels. Inside, all the maker's tags were missing from all the clothing except for 3 items. These were marked Keen, spelled K-E-A-N, or T-Keen, but Keen was K-E-A-N-E. But the police couldn't find anyone missing by either name. Also in the case, though, was a reel of orange thread, identical to the thread used to mend the Somerton Man's trouser pocket.
Well, maybe he did it himself. I mean, that's something most guys would do, just pick up any color thread and mend their own clothes with it. Doesn't matter if it matches.
Also in the case was a stencil kit of the sort used by the 3rd officer on merchant ships responsible for the stenciling of cargo. A table knife with the haft cut down, and a coat stitched using a feather stitch unknown in Australia. A tailor identified the stitchwork as American. Hoping for a good lead, the police searched shipping and immigration records for anyone who might fit the bill, but again, they came up with nothing. In April, 4 months after the Somerton Man's death, closer examination of the corpse and his possessions revealed something kind of odd. A small pocket sewn into the waistband of the dead man's trousers. Thought to be a watch fob pocket, it had gone unnoticed because it had been so carefully sewn shut. Inside, tightly rolled, investigators found a tiny scrap of paper, which, when carefully opened up, contained 2 typeset words in elaborate script. Taman should. Taman should is a Persian phrase, which means it is ended.
Ooh.
Turned out, the tiny scrap of paper had been torn from a rare New Zealand edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was a book of poetry written in the 12th century and had recently become popular again in Australia. So popular that there were many, many editions. So police went in search to libraries, publishers, bookshops, searching for the exact edition that contained the specific fancy script. They completely failed to find it.
Go figure.
But the words, "it is ended," sparked a new line of inquiry. Maybe the Somerton man wasn't murdered by poison, but had taken it willingly to end his own life. This new view didn't help them get any closer to identifying him, though. So much time had passed that arrangements needed to be made for burial. Aware that they were burying the best evidence they had, police first had the body embalmed, and they took casts of both his face and upper torso. After that, the body was buried, then sealed under concrete in a plot of dry ground specifically chosen in case it became necessary to exhume it. As an aside, or maybe not, it could be a clue, flowers would be found at odd intervals on the grave, all the way up until 1978. But no one ever figured out who left them there or why. On July 23rd, 8 months after the investigation had begun, a Glenelg man walked into the detective office in Adelaide with a copy of the Rubaiyat and a strange story. His copy had the same script as the words found in the Somerton man's trousers. The man's story went like this. In early December, he had gone for a drive with his brother-in-law in a car he kept parked a few hundred yards from Somerton Beach. The brother-in-law picked up a copy of the Rubaiyat lying on the floor by the rear seats of the car. Each man had silently assumed it belonged to the other, and the brother-in-law just put it in the glove compartment. The man had forgotten all about it until he read a newspaper article about the case, and when he checked the book, that didn't belong to either him or his brother-in-law, they discovered that part of the final page had been torn out. And so here he was.
Odd.
Very odd. When Detective Sergeant Lien took a closer look at the book, he saw at once that a telephone number was penciled on the back cover. He could also make out the faint impression of some capital letters written underneath when he used a magnifying glass. The unlisted phone number belonged to a young nurse, Jessica Thompson, nicknamed Jestin, who lived near Somerton Beach. Jestin confirmed that she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man she had known during the war, and his name was Alfred Boxall. The only problem is that when police traced his home to Maroubra, New South Wales, they found Alfred alive and well.
Oh, that's a dead end. Literally.
He also still had the copy of the Rubaiyat Justin had given him, completely intact with an inscription she had written at the front and no missing page at the back. Police questioned Justin further and even showed her the cast of the Somerton man's face. According to police, her reaction was very strange. She did seem to recognize him, but she firmly denied ever knowing him. So, Sergeant Lien went back to the Rubaiyat. Under UV light, he was able to make out 5 lines of jumbled letters, the second of which had been crossed out. The first 3 were separated from the last 2 by a pair of straight lines with an X written over them. So it appeared he had found a secret code. They sent the message to Naval Intelligence and allowed the message to be published in the press. But when the Navy concluded that the code was unbreakable, that was it. There was nowhere left to go.
Oh.
The South Australia's coroner's 1958 published report, so 10 years later,
Right.
concluded, quote, "I am unable to say who the deceased was. I am unable to say how he died or what was the cause of death," end quote. In recent years, though, theories have been put forth. Retired Australian policeman Jerry Feltis, author of the only book yet published on the case, and Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, believe that not only did Justin know the Somerton Man, but that he fathered her child.
No way.
They suggest that she may have somehow been involved in spy activities, because interestingly, Alfred Boxall, the man she named in her police interviews as being the Somerton Man, had actually worked in intelligence during the war. They offer further proof that it all had something to do with spies, because Woomera, one of the most secret rocket testing facilities, was only a couple hundred miles from Somerton Beach. And remember that cigarette pack that had a different brand of cigarettes in it?
Yes, I do.
The two men proposed that perhaps that was how the Somerton Man was poisoned, through those cigarettes.
Oh.
Abbott discovered that at least one other man, George Marshall, died in Australia after the war with a copy of Khayyam's poems close by him. Marshall was a Jewish immigrant from Singapore, and his copy of the Rubaiyat was published in London by Methuen, a 7th edition. However, after extensive research, Abbott discovered that there wasn't a 7th edition. So both Marshall and the Somerton Man had fake copies of the books with seemingly unbreakable code written in them.
Wow.
It's so interesting.
That is pretty cool.
Hoping to finally solve the mystery, on May 19th, 2021, the Somerton Man was exhumed. He was placed in a new coffin and taken to a forensic lab for DNA testing. Forensic Science South Australia's Assistant Director of Operations, Dr. Anne Coxon, said, quote, "The technology available to us now is clearly light years ahead of the techniques available when this body was discovered in the late 1940s, end quote. Dr. Coxon said, "Tests of this kind were highly complex, but investigators would use every method at our disposal to try and bring closure to this enduring mystery." The case is part of Operation Persevere, which seeks to put a name to all unidentified remains in South Australia. It's a story that has captured the imagination of people across the state, and indeed across the world. But I believe that finally we may uncover some answers, said South Australian Attorney General Ms. Chapman. But as of April 2022, no official word has been made public on the outcome of the tests.
Well, we'll have to wait and see for that.
But I have an update.
Oh.
I do. I'm so excited. So I originally researched this case back in April. But as of July 27th, just a few days ago, new information came out.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
I know. So Derek Abbott, an Australian professor of biomedical engineering, and Colleen Fitzpatrick, an American genetic genealogist, used some strands of hair stuck in the Somerton Man's death mask to extract DNA. So when they did the death mask, some of his hair got pulled out and was still in it.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So using genealogical data and historical documents, they were able to trace the DNA to one family. So Carl Webb, who went by Charles, seems like the best match. He was born in 1905 in Victoria. He enjoyed writing and reading poetry, and he liked to bet on horse races, which means it's quite possible that the unbreakable code from the back of the Rubaiyat was just a way to keep track of horses' names.
Oh my God. Well, that's different.
Yeah. And the real kicker?
Yeah.
Charles Webb's sister had been married to a man named Thomas Keene.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, remember? T.
Yes.
Keene was the only name found in all of his belongings. On top of that, there is no documentation that exists for Charles Webb's death. So maybe there are some people that are contesting the evidence. But maybe we finally have a name for the Somerton Man. And hopefully the mystery of why or how he died will follow soon.
Yeah, we'll have to pay closer attention, check in on that.
Yeah.
and see what the follow-up is.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. Interesting story, Beth.
Thank you. Hey, did you know? When Tomorrowland opened at Disney World in 1955, it was designed to look like a year in the far distant future, 1986.
The guillotine was used in France until 1977, the year the first Star Wars movie was released.
Charlie Chaplin and 50 Cent were alive at the same time. So was Thomas Edison and William Shatner. So was Orville Wright and Neil Armstrong.
Oxford University existed for hundreds of years before the Aztec Empire.
George Washington died in 1799. The first dinosaur fossil was discovered in 1824, which means George Washington never knew dinosaurs existed.
The Nintendo Company was founded the year Jack the Ripper was being actively hunted.
Harvard didn't offer calculus classes its first few years because calculus wasn't invented yet.
Pablo Picasso died the year Pink Floyd released Dark Side of the Moon. Who'd have thunk it?
So what are you talking about tonight?
I'm going to talk about a legend based in truth from Tennessee that might ring a bell.
Are you talking about the Bell Witch?
Yup.
Nicely done.
Nice guess. The Bell Witch legend has endured for over 200 years, so much so that tourists flock to Tennessee to visit the reconstructed Bell Cabin and to peer into the Bell Witch Cave nearby. What may have caused this enduring legend is that the Bell family were very real and did live through something horrendous. 2 books were written early on that chronicled their experiences: An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch by M.V. Ingram, published in 1894, and A Mysterious Spirit, The Bell Witch of Tennessee by Charles Bailey Bell. But countless other books have been written also, both fictional and historical, and countless movies have been made based on the accounts, most notably The Blair Witch.
Oh.
What we do know as fact is that in 1804, the Bell family, consisting of John and Lucy Bell and their children Jesse, John Jr., Drury, Benjamin, Esther, Zadok, Elizabeth, Richard Williams, and Joel Egbert, built a house and started a farm on 1,000 acres located on the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee. For 13 years, all was well, and then it wasn't. In 1817, John Bell was minding his own business when he allegedly spotted a strange creature in his cornfield. He said it looked like a dog, but had the head of a rabbit. He shot at it, but it simply disappeared. That evening, while John and his family were sitting down to dinner, they heard a strange knocking from outside. Several of John's sons ran outside to investigate, but nothing was found. Soon after, Drury and Betsy also began to see strange things near the property. Drury reportedly saw a bird of a, quote, extraordinary size, which could be chalked up to some kind of unusual bird of prey. But Betsy, well, poor Betsy allegedly saw a girl in a green dress swinging from a limb of an oak tree.
Yikes.
Not just the Bell family were seeing these things either. Some of the enslaved people on the property began reporting an unknown large black dog that had been following them around.
That's never good. When you start seeing weird animals and hearing knocking, you know stuff's about to get bad.
That you do. Betsy, Drury, and John Sr. began to hear the sound of wings flapping against the ceilings, even though no birds or bats had gotten into the house. They also complained of the sound of rats gnawing on bedposts and other furniture. Despite frequent searching, no rats were ever found inside the home either. As if the unexplained animal noises weren't enough, the next level of nastiness was the sound of choking and strangling throughout the house. Chains could be heard dragging across the floors, and large heavy objects would thump as if being dropped. They even described instances where it sounded as if the beds were being torn apart in the bedroom by fighting dogs chained together.
Wow.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
None of the furniture was ever found moved or broken. But then the physical attacks began, most frequently aimed at Betsy. Several of the children endured bed sheets being ripped off them in the middle of the night, as well as feeling as though they were being punched or had their hair pulled. But Betsy was singled out more than any of our other siblings.
Isn't that always the way? It's like one member of a family is always singled out more than the others.
But poor Betsy was pinched, slapped, and felt as though she was being stuck with pins, leaving welts on her body. She also allegedly discovered full red handprints on her skin. At some point, John Bell Jr. began communicating with the unseen spirit, harming him and his family. He would angrily confront it verbally and would receive audible responses. He began to refer to it as the, quote, spirit of the damned. Reportedly, the spirit often claimed she wouldn't leave the Bell family alone until John Sr. was dead and Betsy broke off her relationship with a young man named Joshua Gardner.
It sounds like a poltergeist. So why was it known as a witch?
Legends vary, but the most widely accepted is that during the conversations with the entity, she identified herself as Kate Batts. Kate was the Bells' next-door neighbor and was described as, quote, eccentric. A relative of hers had some sort of dispute with Bell, and over time, perhaps because she was unliked by the other townsfolk, her name became involved. It's assumed in some accounts that Kate conjured the entity that referred to itself by her name. So in that case, Kate would be the witch. It's unlikely that whatever the unseen force was could be Kate's ghost because she actually outlived John Bell.
Oh, okay.
But regardless, the news of the Bell's plight soon traveled beyond their property line, and curious townsfolk as well as outsiders flocked to the property to witness the haunting and to hear the disembodied voices that often filled the home with sound as if it was coming from all directions at once.
That's creepy.
That it is. William Porter, a friend of the Bell family, claimed the witch climbed into bed with him.
Oh, well then, she was a forward witch.
She was a frisky witch. He was able to trap the entity in his bedclothes, and it was his intention to throw it into the fire, but the horrible stench and surprising weight of the ghost made it impossible.
So, wouldn't he infer that the ghost was then an actual person if it was so heavy?
Well, we'll never know because Porter ran from the house and went straight home, but I would assume that he checked it out at least a little bit before running off.
No forward witch for me.
Continuing from 1817 to 1820, many people had encounters with the Bell Witch at the Bell's property. On one occasion, the disembodied voice of the witch perfectly recited a sermon given by Reverend James Gunn of the Bethel Methodist Church, followed immediately by the sermon of Sug Fort, astonishing the witnesses, as the sermons were originally given at the same exact time at the churches 12 miles apart.
That's weird. So it's like she recited one sermon and then immediately recited another, but they were happening 12 miles apart.
Back to back.
At the same time.
Exactly.
Huh.
Even a future president came to the Bell Farm to witness the phenomena. According to the Tennessee State Library and Archives, General Andrew Jackson heard stories about the Bell Witch and decided to investigate it himself in 1819. How he heard about it, though, it's under some debate. Some say he had property nearby, while others say 3 of John Bell's sons fought under Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. When Jackson's entourage crossed onto the Bell property, their wagon became instantly stuck. The wheels seized up and refused to turn. According to legend, Jackson declared that it was the doing of the witch, and a disembodied voice retorted, quote, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight," end quote.
That's a little ominous.
That's creepy. At that very moment, the wagon broke free of the unseen force holding it back and continued on its way. That evening, while at the Bell's home, one of Jackson's men boasted that he was a witch tamer and he could put a silver bullet into any evil spirit. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, he jumped up screaming that he was being pricked with pins. The disembodied voice made itself heard again, this time promising that a fraud was among them and that it would be revealed the following day. Andrew Jackson supposedly said of his night at the farm, quote, "I would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch."
That's strong words.
That's something to say.
Yeah.
Strangely, or perhaps not so strangely, if you consider the lore of many poltergeist cases, at least one member of the Bell family, Mother Lucy, did not find the Bell Witch haunting concerning at all. She believed it existed for sure, but didn't find it the least bit threatening. Maybe that's because early on, the voice of the witch declared Lucy to be, quote, the most perfect woman living. Lucy even claimed that at one point, when she had fallen ill, the witch had cared for her, bringing her flowers and sitting vigil at her bedside.
That is weird, because that is true, or seems to be true, in a lot of poltergeist cases where one family member is targeted and another might feel totally at ease with whatever the entity's doing. Like it divides and conquers.
Right. And you know what I find funny is, why is she cozying up with this witch while it's tormenting her family?
Right.
But
you hear that in a lot of poltergeist cases where one member of the family was like, well,
always
it makes...
singled out.
Right. One singled out, and the other, somebody else might be like, well, it makes me feel comfortable, or it makes me feel... It's really strange.
Yeah, it is. And John Bell wasn't so lucky. I mean, he was repeatedly mocked as Old Jack Bell by the disembodied voice. It would hurl curses and obscene threats at him. John developed strange facial twitches and migraines, followed by the tingling sensations and seizures. A doctor was called on December 19th, 1820, when John could no longer leave his bed. When John Jr. retrieved a vial of medicine in the Holmes cabinet, previously given to them by the doctor, he was surprised to find only one, when 3 had existed the day before. The Bell Witch even gloated, quote, it's useless for you to try to relieve Old Jack. I've got him this time, and he will never get up from that bed again. The strange voice continued that she, quote, gave Old Jack a big dose of it last night while he was fast asleep, which fixed him.
Wow.
Unquote.
She said she wasn't going to leave until he was dead, right?
That she did. Confused and distraught, he gave some of the vial's contents to the house cat, which died instantly.
Oh, no.
Horrified, John threw the vial of medicine into the fire and exploded into blue flames. John Bell Sr. died the next day, but the Bell Witch wasn't done. Allegedly, during John's funeral service, her voice filled the church with bawdy drinking songs.
Oh, I'm sure that went over real well.
She sounds like a character. Now that John Sr. was gone, the Bell Witch returned her sights on Betsy, his daughter. Betsy had been courting Joshua Gardner, and the witch didn't like that at all. All of the former abuse, the hair-pulling, punches, and pin-pricking, resumed in full force. Terrified of what might happen next if she married Joshua, Betsy called off the engagement, and that seemed to appease the witch, but not entirely. Betsy continued to be screamed at and threatened by the phantom voice. She began having fainting spells and the feeling of being smothered. She is quoted as saying, when the spirit became so tantalizing, filling my mind with horror and causing me to become so nervous, my mother often sent me to the neighbors to get a good night's rest. My first night away from the home was spent with Theany Thorne. When we retired, there came a loud knocking on the outside of our door, which seemed to fly open, and a great gust of wind was felt. Then Theany sprang up at once and lit a candle, but to our surprise, the door was not open at all. Then a voice spoke softly, Betsy, you should have never came over here. You know I can follow you anywhere. Now get a good night's sleep. And a soft hand patted my cheek, and the voice again assured us that we would not be disturbed any more that night, end quote.
Oh, that's more ominous than the other stuff.
That it is. A family friend, Frank Miles, attempted to protect Betsy during these attacks, and in one instance, the voice told them, quote, you go home, you can do no good here. The witch then began slapping Betsy and knocked the man to the floor.
Jeez.
Eventually, Betsy did marry her former school teacher, Richard Powell. She and Powell left the area and settled in Mississippi, but not before the Bell Witch had one final message. She apparently told Betsy that she was leaving but would return to the Bell Farm in 7 years. And she did leave. Nothing else happened for 7 years.
Oh.
In 1828, John Bell Jr. claimed that the witch had returned for 3 days and predicted the Civil War, which was like 30 years still in the future. She also told him that she would go now, but would return in 107 years. There are no recorded interactions with the Bell Witch from 1935, the 107-year mark.
Huh. So, what the heck was really going on then? I mean, there has to be theories, because there's always theories.
Well, first, it has been suggested that Richard Powell, Betsy's schoolteacher husband, was to blame. As a schoolteacher, you wouldn't expect him to have a vast knowledge of the occult, ventriloquism, or horticulture. But that's exactly the knowledge some say that he did have. The local rumors, years after the fact, was that Powell was not happy when he found out that Betsy and Joshua Gardner were engaged, and the whole thing was an elaborate hoax to get Betsy to call off the relationship.
Well, that seems kind of far-fetched.
Yep, and a more recent theory has been brought forward by Dr. Megan Mann, a chemistry professor at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. Looking at the legend as fact, Dr. Mann believes that the whole thing could have been due to arsenic poisoning. Arsenic poisoning over the course of several years would explain the neurological issues John Bell had, plus it would explain the blue flames when it was tossed into the fire, and it would explain the death of the poor cat that drank it also. But what about the rest of the family? I mean, what about Betsy? Were they all victims of a combination of both hoax and poisoning? Who would have had such a need for revenge against the entire family? Was it Kate Batts? Was she working in cahoots with Powell?
Or was it a witch?
Well, many people over the 2 centuries would take the side of the haunting by a witch theory. In fact, tourists flock annually to the Bell Witch Cave, Bethel Meeting House, where Kate Batts attended services, and the reconstructed Bell Witch Farm. In 1986, the Tennesseans sent 2 staffers into the Bell Witch Cave overnight. The 490-foot-long cave on the Bell property was believed to be the home of the witch/ghost/entity when it was tormenting the Bell family. It is known to be quite spooky, and after hearing several unexplained noises and groans, the staffers left in a hurry. So I guess it's up for you to decide. Is there any truth to the Bell Witch legends beyond the fact that the Bell family and Kate Batts did exist? Or is it our imaginations and retellings of the stories that keep the legends alive?
Well, I guess no matter what, that family went through something pretty terrifying. And, it's interesting to me that a lot of people who witnessed the voices weren't part of the family at all. But on the other hand, it kind of stinks, though, if Kate Batts' name has been associated with the whole thing for all this time, if she didn't really have anything to do with it.
Yeah, right. And legends and lore take on a life of their own. But at least some of this tale is based in fact. Andrew Jackson was there, and he seemed pretty scared of the Bell Witch.
He sure did. And I don't know if you should be scared, because I just realized that both of our stories have something to do with poisoning.
Oh.
And I did make dinner tonight.
That is true. Well,
I heated dinner tonight. But I also ate it, so I think you're safe.
Well, if you don't hear anything from me for the next episode, my wife probably did it.
On that note, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. Thank you for joining us, and we will see all you wanderers next week.
Yeah, you wanderers take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us. See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.